it's time for a very important corner for us, because it's really the time when we can go and talk about nutrition and pathologies, and that's why it's time to talk to Dr. Christian Orlando, a molecular biologist who is an expert in nutrition and sports supplementation. Welcome back. And writer and popularizer of science, Adriano Panzironi. Welcome back in this block of hours entitled Let Food Be Your Medicine, because we all know that at the base of our health there has to be a healthy and correct diet, but above all there also has to be information and then education on correct eating behavior. So welcome once again for this appointment. Now we are going to launch the topic of this installment. The topic of this installment might seem a bit, how can I put it, peculiar, but it is not. In fact, let's go look at this opening introductory video on gout. Andiamo a vedere infatti questo video di apertura, di introduzione sulla gotta.
Gout is one of the best-known degenerative diseases since ancient times, so much so that the earliest documentation dates back as far as ancient Egypt. Historically, it has been referred to as the disease of kings because it precisely affected sovereigns and nobles. In fact, gout has been associated with such illustrious figures as Charlemagne, Catherine of Aragon, Henry VIII of England, Piero di Cosimo de' Medici, who was nicknamed precisely the Gouty, and more recently, Thomas Jefferson, Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin, Leonardo da Vinci, Benjamin Franklin, and Theodore Roosevelt. The common motive of all these people was a wealthy life and rather excessive eating. In fact, today, that overeating is the new way of life. The number of gout sufferers reaches significant numbers. In Italy, there are 500,000 gout sufferers, and 5 million, on the other hand, are Italians with excessive levels of uric acid, and thus close to the disease.
Dr. Orlando, first of all, what is gout?
Then gout is a metabolic disorder that leads to attacks of arthritis, as there is a buildup of uric acid crystals in the joints. These uric acid crystals tend to accumulate in gout at the level of the big toe of the foot. In fact, it is also commonly called podagra and mainly affects men. However, it has been seen that even after menopause, women have a good incidence. These uric acid crystals that tend to be eliminated by the kidney, so they can accumulate either because the kidney begins to malfunction or because the body produces too much of them. Uric acid crystals are the end product of purine metabolism. Purines are nitrogenous bases that are essentially used in the body for the synthesis of nucleic acids. These are found in all cells. It has been seen how an inflamed cell, as a result of a glucose-rich diet and therefore a very high expression of insulin, is killed, goes into degeneration and is destroyed, leaving these purines in the body. In addition, there is also an endogenous synthesis of purines in the liver, and the human being also has a mechanism to regulate, interconnect, and destroy purines. Sometimes, however, it happens that an inflamed organism has these enzymes involved in this regulation, interconnection, and destruction system inactive because these enzymes are not working. And so, to recapitulate, the excess of uric acid, because the body produces more and retains more, and the kidneys can no longer filter these crystals, causes you to have these phenomena of gout. Questo eccesso di acido urico, perché l'organismo ne produce di più e ne mantiene di più e i reni non riescono più a filtrare questi cristalli, fa sì che si abbiano questi fenomeni di gotta.
Thank you, Dr. Orlando. I wanted to ask Mr. Panzironi, when we talk about gout still today, we think of something from the past. Instead, we saw from our initial video that it is instead very current. There are so many people suffering from gout.
So, one thinks of the past because there are historical references precisely of important people who suffered from it, but in fact, gout, as Dr. Orlando was saying, is a metabolic disease. So it is clear that in a society like ours, where excess food is basically what happens in an overwhelming majority of the population, at least in the Western world, it is clear that gout becomes one of those metabolic diseases that is more present. It has to be said that gout, as much as it can, be induced by an excess of uric acid, so consequently by an excess of the presence of purines, which, as Dr. Orlando said, are derived from the degradation of the nuclei of cells, so we can have both endogenous way, so self-produced with the death of our cells. So as inflammation increases, they increase the apoptosis of our cells. More purine acids are put obviously in the blood. This leads to an elevation of uric acids. On the other hand, obviously a diet rich in products where there is a greater presence of cells, example bluefish, which are basically animals composed of so many cells and therefore many nuclei, and the same also meat, but also legumes and so on and so forth. So let's say that for the so-called dogmatic medicine to keep gout at bay, we need to reduce the consumption of these purine-rich foods. Actually, we are the ones who produce the most purines. However, another phenomenon is needed for the appearance of uric acid crystals, which is the lowering of pH within, obviously, the extracellular matrix. If this lowering of pH does not take place, the uric acid is not crystallized. There is no decay, and therefore the formation of these crystals.
Both of you have talked about uric acid and purines, and it is this video that we are going to look at now that explains how sugars instead induce the increase in uric acids. Let's look at it together.
Sugars are responsible for two phenomena that are the cause of increased hyperuricemia: the excessive production of purines by our body and the reduction of secretion efficiency by the kidneys. The increase in purines is induced by the destruction of our cells by sugar and insulin-induced metabolic changes, such as inflammation, increased free radicals, disruption of the immune system, increased fat mass, autoimmune diseases, and diabetes. Instead, the inability to eliminate uric acid is promoted by two different processes: the excessive presence of lactic acid and pyruvic acid, and the excessive stimulation of aldosterone. Pyruvic acid and lactate are the waste products of cells producing energy from sugars through glycolysis. These acidic wastes must be eliminated as a priority, and thus prevent the elimination of uric acid. Aldosterone is stimulated by insulin, which, in order to retain sodium, also inhibits kidney secretory activity of uric acid.
So, Mr. Panzironi, to simplify, it's all sugar's fault?
Absolutely, yes, because the very excess of carbohydrates that are then converted in our intestines into glucose are the main reason for the acidification of the tissues that then lead to the precipitation of these crystals. And of course, the fact that sugars are the basis of inflammation, if we think of the NLRP3 inflammasome that within mast cells induce an inflammatory response that then goes on to exacerbate also the lowering of both the pH and the inflammation of the cells present in the cartilage where these crystals form. Obviously, why do they form within the cartilage or synovial vessels? For the simple fact that where there are these fluids and there is a lowering of the pH, there the presence of uric acids transforms them and causes them to precipitate in the form of crystals. And then there they then induce a systemic inflammation of the joint. Therefore, this incredible pain that you feel when precisely there is a kind of, we even feel a kind of needles inside the cartilage, as if when we move as we go along, it's as if they use pins to induce this pain.
I'm going to Dr. Orlando because I wanted to ask if through nutrition, so maybe prevent or even better solve this kind of pathology, can you through nutrition?
Surely you can, because it is a diet low in carbohydrates, which are the foods that go to inflame our organism, and consequently the various districts, as we said, at the level of the joints, at the level of this lowering of pH in the extracellular matrix, and therefore this accumulation of uric acid crystals, eliminating upstream the problem, the food that inflames the organism, because the organism has a great capacity for self-repair. We always say this: the moment we eliminate the foods that go to inflame the organism is able to self-repair and thus solve the problem, to re-establish a correct acid-base balance within our organism and thus solve the problem and pathology.
So thanks to nutrition, we can both prevent and solve the pathology of gout. However, we also introduced another element regarding gout, that is the kidneys that play a very important role regarding this pathology. I wanted to add to gout also all those chronic kidney diseases that can still be very, let's say, so disabling and harmful to our body. Let's go and introduce this topic.
Chronic kidney disease is a real health emergency that is too often underestimated. In fact, in the latest report published in The Lancet, there would be 3.5 million people in Italy with chronic kidney disease. This is a rather alarming figure, given that in just 2 decades, the number of cases has practically doubled. In the last year alone, there were 2 million nephrology visits, there are 25,000 transplant patients, and 50,000 dialysis patients. In addition, as in many degenerative diseases, about 3/4 of the patients are completely unaware of their condition and risk, without proper treatment, going to swell the ranks of people waiting for transplantation on dialysis.
So the video basically described to us a very dramatic situation. I wanted to ask Mr. Panzironi, when a disease is so present within the population, you can no longer say that there is a genetic predisposition, but there is something else. i.e., you cannot say that it is an inescapable disease of old age or of one's own body.
I would say that he is right for the simple fact that even this i.e. damage to the kidneys is due to a metabolism that is altered. We think that the kidneys are very delicate structures because the end part of the kidneys are tubules that are very small and are microvascularized. So any pathology or any action that goes to damage the epithelium of these vessels induces an inability of these structures to be able to filter and therefore eliminate from our blood all those wastes that must be eliminated at all times to precisely preserve our health. It is obvious that when you have millions and millions of people who begin to suffer even early on from this type of kidney disease, it is obviously evident that diet plays a preponderant role in damaging these very delicate structures, and therefore we can no longer speak of a genetic predisposition, but of a bad diet and bad lifestyle that are the normal consequence of kidney damage.
Mr. Panzironi, however, is there any correlation between other degenerative diseases that somehow induce kidney failure?
Certainly, yes. If we think of diabetes, it is no coincidence that most people who suffer from kidney disease have the co-presence of diabetes, but this, of course, is due to what? It is due to the fact that the hyperglycemia goes right to damage the endothelium, which is composed precisely of tight junction cells. And when these tight junctions are damaged and the same cells are reduced to apoptosis, there is obviously an increase in the fenestration of these tubules, and therefore the kidney is no longer able to filter in the correct mode that it should do since we are children. So it is obvious that high blood pressure, diabetes, insulin resistance are all inflammation-related pathologies and therefore obviously present when you have kidney disease.
Dr. Orlando, in addition to nutrition that we have repeated several times within this discussion of ours, I wanted to ask you, with supplementation, you can in some way be useful. That is, supplementation, you can be useful both in preventing and possibly solving both gout and kidney problems, therefore those pathologies of kidney failure or degenerative kidney disease.
Certainly, yes, because as I always say, nutrition is 50% of the whole mechanism. Then supplementation goes to complement everything that nutrition does. So supplementation based on anti-inflammatory products that go to flush out the body, antioxidants that go to cleanse our body of free radicals and then get the cells working properly again. demolire il nostro organismo dai radicali liberi e quindi a far sì che le cellule ricomincino a lavorare in maniera corretta. Are all precisely supplements that get the body back on track in the correct way. It's critical, it's important to do proper supplementation along with nutrition so that the whole picture is correct and all the pieces of the puzzle fall into place, because one cannot do without the other. Che tutto il quadro sia corretto e tutti i pezzi del puzzle si mettano a posto, perché l'uno non può fare, diciamo, a meno dell'altro.
Great, and I instead see our Mr. Panzironi, who at the appointment with Make Food Be Your Medicine always shows up with his book, which is a scientific research that he did that is titled Living to 120 Healings, and from there are so many results obtained just from thanks to the Life 120 lifestyle, so many healings from very important diseases, about just the gout of chronic kidney disease. What kind of results we obtained with that observational research.
So we have two, obviously the book provided, this observational research provided for almost 80 pathologies. So we asked 1,000 people to answer a questionnaire about the pathologies they had before they started this Life 120 lifestyle, and then immediately afterwards, who 6 months, who 1 year, who 3 years, the results they got precisely on the various pathologies. In this case, if we're talking about gout, the first topic we went into this morning, well, we're talking about 22 people who had been identified in this group of 1,000 who suffer from gout. 82% said that they were cured of it. Basically, their tests came back regular. They had no more gout attacks. 14% had an improvement, and this, of course, should still be noted in short, because an improvement is always a metabolic condition that goes in the direction of healing. Also, because this is a snapshot that we took after a number of years, it does not mean that these people then, over time, healed themselves, and therefore this improvement then turned into a healing. 4%, which is a very small percentage indeed, did not get results. 75% of this group of people are no longer using drugs, and 25% have not modified. It must also be said that when it comes to medication, very often people are afraid to take off the medication. So even being well, they always tend to keep this so-called Linus cover to say, okay, I'm fine, but I wouldn't want to take off the medication so as not to get worse. Also because very often dogmatic medicine does not believe in cures or improvements by this measure. And so it tends, when the patient goes back to the doctor to ask if he can take off the medication, the doctor says, once I gave you the medication, he must not take it off at all. So there is a chance that a percentage of these people, despite being cured, then continue to keep the medication.
Look, though you mentioned doctors, we every time, of course, say that as far as medicines are concerned, those who gave it, those who prescribed it, must also take it off. So we know, however, that there are enlightened doctors who, with tests and certifications in hand, then reconsider and go and take off that kind of medicine that had been prescribed to the patient. So those who gave you, prescribed you the medicines, will then, he, of course, will be the one to take it off, because we have always said that DIY, as far as medicines are concerned, cannot be done precisely, because always everything is controlled. I wanted to ask another thing instead to Mr. Panzironi. What kind of tests reveal that we have any kind of pathology at the kidney level or gout anyway?
Well, there are all the tests related, obviously, to renal evaluations. Maybe Dr. Orlando can explain it better. Maybe he is more technical about the laboratory tests.
Yes, definitely creatinemia and urea are the two markers that are mainly used to see chronic kidney disease, or anyway kidney disease in general. I mean,
so it should be kept under control.
And what I can tell you is that sometimes in those who follow this lifestyle, they can also have a maintenance of high uricemia, but this does not result in the formation of uric acid crystals. This is a demonstration of what we were saying before, because, by the way, urea is also capable of having an antioxidant capacity towards the cells. The talk is its excess, but especially its transformation, of course, into crystals that then induce inflammation and this gouty arthritis.
Let food be your medicine. I thank Dr. Christian Orlando and our own Adriano Panzironi.